Namaste, hello, and a very warm welcome to UPSC for everyone. My name is Abhinav, and in this video, we'll be discussing selected topics from the Hindu and Indian Express for the date 16th of September. Now, in this video, we'll be discussing the following topics: to the brink and back in Ladakh. So, again, new developments are taking place in the Ladakh sector. So, in this article, I'll be giving you a detailed map analysis of what is really happening, which areas are important, and I will also be telling you about the strategic importance of the Depsang Plains. Then I will also tell you about the 5-finger strategy of Mao Zedong. That is still something that China is obsessing over, and that is creating problems in the South Asian region. So we will discuss all of that in this article. Then Russia inks pact to test supply Sputnik 5 vaccines to India. So just a simple thing that the Russian company that is developing the Sputnik 5 has signed an agreement with Dr. Reddy's to test and to produce 100 million vaccines in India. New order in West Asia. Now this deals with the ramifications of the Abraham Accords, which have finally been signed between UAE, Israel and Bahrain. So what kind of a new order is coming up in West Asia? That it explains. I will also explain the map that you need to know of West Asia. I will show you where is Israel, what are the regional dynamics, and then we'll see what the new order is and what it means for Mr. Donald Trump. Beyond the barriers on disability. Now this is a good article. It has some good facts about the plight of the disabled people. So we'll see them. Lok Sabha not to amend Banking Act. So this comes in the backdrop of the PMC scam, which was a urban cooperative bank, and there was a scam, and the scam was because it was not clearly under RBI regulation. So the government brought in an ordinance to bring the urban cooperative banks under the direct and only control of RBI, and now that is being converted into a bill. So I will tell you what are cooperative banks and how are they different from the normal scheduled commercial banks. Then 186 billion import substitution possible. This is a good article. It tells us about the capabilities of Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. Basically, it is a report by the Exim Bank, and it identifies some sectors like electronics, automobile components, cement and steel that can be developed in India, and that can save us $186 billion in terms of import substitution. So I will tell you what is import substitution. I will also tell you that how it will not only save us $186 billion, but it will also open opportunities for us to bring in more forex and in that terms help solving the current account deficit problem in India. Then pre 12,000 years, government re-ups panel to study Indian culture. So an interesting read. Now government of India is trying to understand our culture in a better light, because the history as we know it has been written by the colonizers and we have been foolishly following that version of history. So there have been some new exciting findings, scientific findings. For example, last year in Rakhigari, some skeletons were found, and when they were subjected to DNA analysis, they basically showed that the people that occupy this South Asian region are a completely indigenous people, and there have been a continuity of civilization for at least 4,500 years old. Then there is a site in Meherganj in Pakistan which shows the Indian civilization dating back to at least 10,000 years. So a new group has been found. Basically this group was found in 2016. It could not fulfill its mandate, so it has been reformed. So we'll see what are the things involved with this, what are the existing theories about how the Indian people came to be, and how are those theories being debunked. So let's get started. To the brink and back in Ladakh. So before we begin, let me point out some places on the map so that it is easier for you to locate them. Now first of all, Depsang Plains, and today I'll be telling you about the importance of the Depsang Plains. Now this is Galwan. It has been in news. Shyok, Darbuk and Daulat Beg Oldie. Now this Daulat Beg Oldie is very, very important strategically for India, and India has shown capability of landing C-130s here. And now India is also mobilizing tanks to this post. Now see, this post is just next to the LAC, and it is just next to the Xinjiang region, which is very sensitive for China. So this is a very advantageous position for India, and even China does not have the capability of launching an aircraft in this region. So this gives India a strategic edge. Now China has been particularly perturbed because India built a road called Darbuk Shok Daulat Beg Oldie, and this passes through the Galwan sector. Now if this road is complete, then India has a complete access from Leh to Daulat Beg Oldie. That is the northernmost post of India, and it is the highest landing strip in the region. Now this is threatening for China, and that is why there was a huge standoff, and still there is problem in the Galwan sector. Similarly, we'll see the importance of Depsang Plains. The name itself suggests that these are plains in an area surrounded by mountains. So they give a clear access to this path. So blocking this path is also very, very important. And this is again Darbuk Shok Daulat Beg Oldie, which runs through the Galwan sector. And this is, like I always tell you, China National Highway 219, strategically important for China. This is Aksai Chin. It connects Tibet to Xinjiang. Now the defense minister made his statement in the parliament. So he mentioned some places. So along with those places, let us also look at some of the other places in this map. Mapping is important. They may ask in the prelims about some passes or some places. So let us see. So this is Lanakla, which is a pass. Okay. Daulat Beg Oldie, I've already told you. Then Chipchap Reservoir. This represents a disputed area. This is the Shok River. This is the Galwan River. This is the Chang Chenmo River. And north of the Pangong Lake is the Chang Chenmo mountain ranges. The spurs of these mountain ranges are called fingers, and the LSA in the Pangong Tso Lake is marked in terms of finger points. I've already explained these things in an earlier video. You can go back and refer to those videos. And 1/3 of the Pangong Tso lies in India and 2/3 in China. Now this is Rezangla. This is also very important, this pass, and the Sangpur Lake and the Sangpur Plains. Now, just like Daulat Beg Oldie is important in this area, the Galwan area, the Sangpur Plain is important in the Chushul area. It again is a plain from where access becomes easier. So protecting this area is also very, very important. This is Leh, this is Siachen. I've already shown you in yesterday's video as well. Again, Xinjiang, Aksai Chin Road or the China Highway 219. Changla, Jarala. These are the passes which you must know because they are also important for your mapping. So this is Changla, this is Jarala, and this is Demchok. Demchok has also been in news. So this place is Demchok. And this is Indus River. See, it flows next to Jarala. So important places: Jarala, Changla, Demchok, Rezangla, Pangur Lake, Pangur Plains, Chushul area, then Pangong Lake, then Konga Pass. Defense Minister specifically named this area Konga Pass. Then Chang Chenmo River, Galwan River, Chipchap Reservoir, and Daulat Beg Oldie. And these are the heights on the southern bank of the Pangong Tso, which Indian Army has occupied now. Thangkung, Chushul, Pankha, Helmet Top, Black Top. This has really rattled the Chinese because they have lost the strategic edge, and now China is likely to push the ante because they have lost the face in Ladakh sector. So they are trying to push India from the Arunachal sector. We'll be discussing that in a day or two. Also, they are also pushing their proxy called Nepal. Now Nepal is also trying to claim areas like Nainital. So these are the heights that we have occupied: Rezangla, Rechinla, Magar Hill, ITBP Hill, and again see this Mukpari Hill overlooks the Moldo post of China. This is Pangur Lake, Gurung Hill, Rezangla. All these are under Indian control now, and you can see that they are almost next to the LAC and they are at heights, so they give us a clear view of what is happening. And even if Chinese troops try to make an incursion through plains, we can easily spot them and we can give a befitting reply. One more thing I will tell you in the article only. Now China has been trying to retake these hills, but this is a very difficult task and it is estimated that to retake a hill requires 9:1 ratio, and the casualties are very high, such as unfortunately the casualties we had to face when we took back the mountain features during the Kargil war. But China is not ready to take so many casualties. We already know that they are not an honorable army. They don't even acknowledge their dead soldiers. So they won't be taking that kind of a risk, but they are trying to do different things at the LAC. For example, they are building optical fiber networks, they are building airstrips. So there are a lot of things that are happening, and we need to analyze that, and we'll be doing that soon in a video. Now let us see what this article is saying. A recent editorial in the Global Times in Beijing has put out a clarion call for the people of China to be prepared for war with neighbors. So this Global Times is like the unofficial or official mouthpiece of the Communist Party of China. This was put out after Jaishankar Wang Yi talks and included a reference to the moral conduct of war. So now Chinese are talking about moral conduct of war. Now all of this goes back to Mao's 5-finger strategy. So let us see what is this strategy. The strategy has continuously sought to reassert control over Arunachal Pradesh, or what the PRC calls Southern Tibet, Bhutan, Sikkim, Nepal and Ladakh, as part of an effort to secure China's periphery. So these are all the places that are bordering China. So basically what China is doing, every place that is bordering China, be it land border or the maritime border, China is picking up fights because it is basically creating a buffer zone around itself. So this is nothing but Mao's 5-finger strategy, and Mr. Xi Jinping seems to be obsessed with this, and this is leading to destabilization in not just South Asia but across the South China Sea, and China is also picking up fights with Japan in the East China Sea and also with Russia, and China is also looking for war with Taiwan. It has been intimidating Taiwan, so let's see what happens there. Now pause and rethink. Because of the actions of Indian Army and the tough stand that we have taken, China has had to take a pause. The PLA remains entrenched in grey areas and has been forced to pause and mull over the future action. So grey areas are the areas which are not clearly belonging to any side. So China has been limited to these grey areas. For example, like I told you, fingers 4 to 8 in the Pangong Tso area are known as grey areas. So all these areas between patrolling points where there is no clear demarcation, this area belongs to which side, they are grey areas. So Chinese troops are basically in the grey areas, and because of Indian actions now they are forced to rethink. Now the problem with China is that China has extensively studied the 1991 Iraq war that America waged, but they are unaware of the mountain warfare, and this territory needs mountain warfare. And like I've been telling you time and again, who is the most experienced and expert force in the world when it comes to mountain warfare? It is the Indian Army. And China is worried now. They've been trying to play mind games with us, and they've been trying to push us to pull back before the winter comes. Because more than us, they are worried that they won't be able to last in winter. And I've also told you that the Chinese soldiers are just paper soldiers or paper tigers, because they are the children of one child policy. They are spoiled brats. They cannot face these tough conditions. So we'll get to know real soon. But again, I'm saying let's not hope for a war, because for us it is very easy to say let's go to war, but we don't want our soldiers to die. India's tough stand. The spontaneous and violent responses of the Indian Army during the Galwan clash and the well-planned and executed operation to tactically occupy important heights. I've already shown you all the heights on both the northern and southern banks of Pangong Tso have demonstrated a wide spectrum of capabilities and intent on India's part. Now we have made it absolutely clear to China that we are not backing down. We are going to take the bully by its horns. And that is the problem. When you call out a bully, they get intimidated, and that is what is happening to China. And it is the fake reputation of Red Army that China had built up over the years with fake propaganda videos that is really being tested, and China is not happy about it. Uphill attacks to dislodge entrenched defenders from the kind of heights now occupied by the Indian Army would require overwhelming force ratio of upwards of 9:1. I just told you, and the Chinese soldiers are paper tigers. One may wonder whether the PLA has the appetite to deal with such losses. And we are not only countering them on land, we are also giving them a challenge in the seas, because they started poking us in the Indian Ocean region. Now we are reaching out to the region that which China considers its own strategic backyard, like the Pacific and the South China Sea. As China got engaged in our strategic backyard, the South Asian region and the Indian Ocean region, now we are entering their strategic backyard. Indian Navy's assertive maritime posturing, its willingness to join collaborative groupings to contain an aggressive PLA navy, and increasing articulation on the need to ensure freedom of navigation reflects a growing willingness on India's part to go out and meet an adversary on the high seas rather than stay in the backwaters. So now we are leading from the front. Now the biggest stumbling block to rapprochement between the two countries lies within the PLA. Now PLA thinks of itself as the most important arm of the Chinese state, which has seriously intellectualized its role as the sword arm of Chinese national power. Several practitioners feel that the current face-off will only be resolved if PLA is offered a face-saving proposition, and that would need some deft politico-military diplomatic maneuvering from India. Now, what of a fresh boundary agreement with China following this face-off? So is there a chance? Now, according to the author, two trajectories seem possible. First would be the path of least resistance, and we'll be building some new confidence measures and some new ground rules on how to deal with this problem, but it will keep the LAC hot. And again, it will create a problem because this will again crop up. The second would entail a stroke of enlightened statesmanship like exchange of areas. It has been speculated that in the past there were offers from Zhao Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, but how much of that is true, we really can't say. And how much India is willing to swap, we really can't say. Now this part is from the Indian Express, and it is basically telling us about the importance of Depsang Valley. Now Indian Express took an interview of a very high ranking army official in the area, and they have put his statements. Of course, they have not named him. So let's see what are the things that he has said. So what is basically saying that India has not lost any territory, but we are not able to patrol the areas what we used to earlier because of this standoff. Indian patrolling points in the area have been blocked since April. Army steps up presence on alert to foil any ingress attempt elsewhere along LAC. So like I told you, now that China is rattled, it might push from other areas of LAC, the most likely being the Arunachal sector. And there could also be a three-front war, not two-front war, because China is increasingly including Nepal, and Pakistan is also trying to keep us occupied by various ceasefire violations. So let's see. Other than regular ceasefire violations and infiltration, no mobilization of troops by Pakistan is evident either along the LOC or near Siachen, which is located 80 km east of Depsang Plains. Now he's also saying that Pakistan has kept a sizable number of Indian troops busy, so we are basically bringing troops from other regiments. And while at the moment focus is on Eastern Ladakh, Indian Army is also aware of the possibility that China might attempt an ingress from other places along the LAC. Now he's telling us about the patrolling points where what is happening. Most important part is that importance of Depsang Plains. Now the Depsang Plain is significant not just because it is 30 km southeast of the strategically important Daulat Beg Oldie Post. I've already shown you all of this in the mapping introduction that I gave before I started this article. So important Daulat Beg Oldie Post near the Karakoram Pass in the north. But also because in the midst of mountainous terrain, it offers a flat surface. Like I told you, it is a flat valley and it gives a perfect place for incursion. which can be used by either of the two countries to launch a military offensive similar to the Spangor Gap in Chulchul sub-sector. So I've told you everything. And what's also significant in the Deksan Plain is that what we consider LAC for the past 15 years, India has not been able to reach that point. So China is not there. What he's saying that whenever we go to patrol that area, they trail us or they block us, but they are not permanently stationed there. So this is the gist of two articles from the Hindu and Indian Express. Russia inks pact to test supply Sputnik 5 vaccine to India. So in 2-3 videos, I've discussed in detail about Sputnik 5, which company is making it. It was released after only phase 2 trials. Now phase 3 trials are being held and all of that. So we'll just quickly go through it. So the Russian Direct Investment Fund, or the RDIF, which is piloting the Russia's Sputnik 5 vaccine candidate, recently in phase 3 trials has partnered with Hyderabad-based Dr. Reddy's Laboratories to test and, subject to regulatory approvals in India, supply 100 million doses of the vaccine. So let's see when this phase 3 gets over and when this gets the certification from Indian authorities. I've also explained which is the Indian authority, DCGI and the CDCSO. You can go and refer to earlier videos. I've explained whole regulatory structure and the phases of clinical trial, everything in those videos. Now, very good news and a very good opportunity for entrepreneurs in India. This is a report by Exim Bank. It says $186 billion import substitution possible. Now, what is import substitution? That we are making the things in our country which we used to export. So it has given some sectors. If we focus on those sectors and if we cater to their specific needs, then we can save $186 billion on import bill only. And once those industries develop, they can also help in exports of India. So it will help us in terms of current account deficit, that it will save our forex. In fact, in the long run, it will earn us forex. So let's see what the report is saying. A study by Exim Bank. Exim Bank basically specializes in these export-import transactions, and it gives loans to such companies who are engaged in the business of imports and exports. Titled Self-Reliant India, Approach and Strategic Sectors to Focus. Promoting self-reliance in sectors such as electronics and defense equipment, among others, can lead to import substitution of over $186 billion for India. Now, what are the sectors? Apart from electronics and automobiles, machinery, chemical and allied sectors, select agricultural products, auto components, iron and steel. So these are the specific sectors. If we focus on these sectors, we could save $186 billion. Though there is overall trade surplus for the country, but in some subcategories, there is trade deficit, particularly with China. And that too in machinery, auto components and iron and steel and electronics. The study recommended several sector-specific strategies for reducing import dependence by enhancing domestic production, based on an assessment of the specific needs and issues faced by each of these sectors. So we need to do a survey of the specific needs of these sectors, then analyze the results and give them the required support so that these sectors can develop in India. New order in West Asia. So this article is about the Abraham Accords, which are being signed between UAE, Israel and Bahrain. So it tells us the new order that is emerging in West Asia, and we'll also see what this means for Donald Trump. So what are the parties? The West Asian region, the Palestinian people and the American politics. So we'll see individually the effect of this deal on them. First, let us just quickly look at the region known as West Asia. You can take a screenshot and you can analyze later. See, this is Israel. This white portion is Palestine. I'll show again in some other map. Just wait for a moment. This is Turkey. This is Syria, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. This is Egypt. So this region, and this is Oman, Yemen, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE. Okay. So now Bahrain and UAE are signing. Both are, you can see, so small in front of Saudi Arabia. I've also explained why Bahrain is so dependent on Saudi Arabia, especially after 2011. And both of them are close allies of Saudi. So they are signing the deal because they have Saudi's blessing. And eventually Saudi will also sign the deal. But right now the public opinion, the larger public opinion in the Arab world is pro-Palestine. That is why Saudi is not signing. And why are they doing so? Because America is pulling out of this region and they have a greater threat of Iran. They perceive Iran to be a greater villain. So they are joining hands with Israel because an enemy of my enemy is my friend. Iran is a sworn enemy of Israel. So these countries are now aligning with Israel, and through Israel they can get access to sophisticated weapons and also other opportunities in economic arena. And in this region Israel is the only nuclear power, so having Israel as an ally would certainly help these countries. Now what does that mean for the Palestinian people? Is that issue dead? Now new leaders are arising which are not Arab, but they are aspiring to be the leaders of Islamic world. For example, Turkey under Mr. Erdogan. Turkey is now aspiring to be the leader of Sunni Islamic world, and Iran. So they will be filling up the vacuum that is being left by the withdrawal of Saudi Arabia eventually when this will happen. What would it mean for Donald Trump? Just 50 days or 60 days to election, it would be a boost for his otherwise dud foreign policy. So he can claim victory that he has made a historic change. Will it bring peace to the West Asian region? We cannot say for sure. As a matter of fact, when this accord was being signed, there were reports of violence along the West Bank and Israel area, and Israel also conducted some airstrikes. So it is not going to bring peace so soon. Now let us see what the article is saying. So see, this is Israel, this is West Bank, and this is Gaza Strip. These both area are Palestine. This is famous Dead Sea. Now Israel is sharing its border with Jordan, Egypt. This is Sinai Peninsula. This is Lebanon. Lebanon is also in news these days. This is Golan Heights. This is Syria. Now Golan Heights is a controversial area and we'll be discussing it in detail later on. And this is the Jordan River. Fine. So this is how the area looks. Now let us see what the article is saying. Abraham Accords signed in the White House by UAE, Bahrain and Israel under US President Donald Trump's mediation clearly mark a new beginning in the relationship between Sunni-ruled Gulf kingdoms and the Jewish state. Now see, none of those Gulf kingdoms are sharing border with Israel or are present in the region. So for them, signing the accord is easier. They don't have to face any direct consequences. Plus, they have always had some backroom contacts with Israel. So signing those accords is just formalizing those contacts. The agreements have the backing of Saudi Arabia, arguably the most influential Arab power and a close ally of UAE and Bahrain. Now, what is the significance for West Asia? It is historical and geopolitical significance. Too early to say whether the accords will have any meaningful impact on West Asia's myriad conflicts. Unlike Egypt and Jordan, which signed the peace treaties with Israel in 1979 and 1994, respectively, the Gulf countries are not frontline states in the Arab-Israeli conflict, like I just told you. The deals only normalize their long-term contacts. The agreements leave the Palestinian question largely unaddressed. But it does not mean that the Palestinian question would fade away. The vacuum left by the retreat of Arab powers from the Israel-Palestine conflict is being filled by non-Arab Muslim powers, Iran, Turkey and their allies. I've already told you all of this in the introduction to this article. The UAE-Bahrain agreements are in fact endorsing the region's emerging order. Now the article is saying that this region is developing into a three-way contest. With the US in retreat, Turkey and Iran pursuing more aggressive foreign policies, there is a three-way contest taking shape. Sunni-ruled Arab kingdoms, all American allies, are realigned with their geopolitical interest with Israel. And I've also told you why Israel is the only nuclear power in the region. We don't really know about Iran, whether it has created a weapon or not. for all practical purposes, Iran is not there yet. So Israel is the only nuclear power in the region, and allying with Israel is good for these Sunni Arab kingdoms. Like I always tell you, international relations are not run by, as a matter of fact, statecraft and international relations are not run by emotions but by pragmatism. What it means for Trump? The Accords, the first between Israel and Arab countries since 1994, Jordan-Israel peace treaty, offer a rare diplomatic win to Mr. Trump. With less than 50 days to go before his re-election bid, he has called the agreements a new dawn of a new Middle East. Now we all know Mr. Trump likes to brag, but let us see if this really turns out to be the new dawn of a new Middle East. LS Nod to amend Banking Act. So recently there was a scam in the PMC Bank. So PMC Bank was basically a cooperative bank, and there was a large scale scam there. So a lot of account holders have virtually lost their money because they are not able to take out that money. Many people sadly have also committed suicide, and they were salaried class people. So the real problem was that these cooperative banks, the urban cooperative banks, they come under dual control, RBI and the Societies Act. Now what happens? Because of this multiplicity of control, there are gray areas. So they could, just like thieves, they could cheat the system. And that is why this scam happened. So the union government came up with an ordinance to replace that and to bring these banks under the exclusive control of RBI. So this ordinance is now being converted into a bill. I will also be telling you later on what is a ordinance in some other video. Just to give you a short brief, ordinance come under Article 123. They are promulgated by the President of India. They are promulgated when the Parliament is not in session. So we'll discuss that in detail. There are a lot of technicalities with them, so we'll be discussing them later. Let us see what this article says, and I'll also tell you about cooperative banks. The Lok Sabha passed an amendment to the Banking Regulation Act 1949, which will bring cooperative banks under the direct supervision of the RBI and bring them under some of the same governance norm as commercial banks. It will allow RBI to amalgamate or restructure a stressed cooperative bank, as was the case with PMC, without first imposing a moratorium, thus protecting the interests of the depositors. Now, RBI basically imposed a moratorium. It said that you cannot take more than this amount of money, and people had invested their life savings in that bank, so they are suffering right now. Now, what is a cooperative bank? Cooperative banks are financial entities established on a cooperative basis and belonging to their members. So it's like members themselves, they come together, they form a bank, and then they operate that bank. This means that the customers of a cooperative bank are also its owners. These banks provide a wide range of regular banking and financial services. Broadly, cooperative banks in India are divided into two categories, urban and rural. In India, they are registered under the States Cooperative Societies Act. So, under what? States Cooperative Societies Act. So, PMC Bank was registered under Maharashtra Cooperative Societies Act. So, this is important point for your PT. They also come under the regulatory ambit of Reserve Bank of India under two laws, namely Banking Regulations Act 1949 and Banking Laws Cooperative Societies Act 1955. So these are the nitty-gritty or the small points that they probably ask in prelims. So you should keep them in mind. Now these banks were not popular with the RBI, but they were popular with the customers because they offered high interest rates. Let us see. While they may be unpopular with RBI, UCBs remain quite a hit with retail savers and small businesses. Retail savers are individuals who are saving their money because they offer attractive interest rates on deposits, far higher than commercial banks. Now see, in finance, the riskier an investment, the greater the return. So it is the greed that basically gets you in a soup. There are three key points of difference between scheduled commercial banks and cooperative banks. One, unlike commercial banks, UCBs are only partly regulated by the RBI, and that is the problem. Now that problem is being removed by this new bill. Two, unlike commercial banks, which are structured as joint stock companies, UCB are structured as cooperatives with their members carrying unlimited liability. Again, a problem. 3. While there is a clear distinction between the commercial bank's shareholders and its borrowers, in a UCB, borrowers can develop as shareholders. So this can create conditions of conflicts of interest. In the event UCBs fail, deposits with them are covered by the Deposit Insurance and Credit Guarantee Corporation of India. Again, very important point for your PT. Up to a sum of rupees 1 lakh per depositor, the same as for a commercial bank. So how much money, for example, I have put my entire gratuity savings in this account, and that may be 1 crore, 50 lakh, 60 lakh. And if this bank goes down, how much will I get? Only 1 lakh rupees. And that is the sad part. Now hopefully when they come under the direct control of RBI, such things will not happen in future, and let's hope that this PMC scam gets solved. It does not end up like others where the culprits roam free and then we forget everything about the scams. Supreme Court for quick trial in cases against politicians. So there are more than 4,000 cases that are pending in different courts against the politicians, both sitting MPs, MLAs and the ex-MPs, MLAs. So Supreme Court has said that it will be taking up those cases on a priority basis. So let us see. The Supreme Court resolved to ensure that pending criminal trials against sitting and former legislators, which run to over 4,000 across the country, will be completed in a time-bound manner. There are over 2,500 criminal cases pending against sitting legislators. So this is one of the legal political reform that is highly required in our country right now. Let's see. Beyond the barriers of disability. Now this is a very good article. It has given some good facts about the problems faced by the disabled people. So let us see. Based on recent estimates, over 1 billion people worldwide are impacted by the disability and the stigma surrounded it. And it is true, because disability with itself comes with a lot of stigma. Those people are looked at differently. Some people look at them with pity. Some people mistreat them. And this article is saying that the disabled people form a global minority, and especially disabled women and girls are very much susceptible to sexual violence. A global minority. According to the World Health Organization, nearly 15% of world's population has some or other form of disability, making disabled people the largest global minority. Continuous discrimination denies them equal access to education, employment, healthcare, and other opportunities. Essentially, what we are looking at is an enormous reservoir of untapped resources excluded from the workforce. So maybe they have some form of a disability, physical disability, yet they can be very productive members for the society, like the para athlete Deepa Malik and so many other people who are disabled and they have achieved great heights. For example, Dr. Stephen Hawking, such a great man, and he faced such great disability. And there have been so many other people, so many great artists like Mozart, Beethoven. They had mental disability or some problems like autism, and they were great people. So despite these disabilities, these people are great pool of talent, and they and that talent should be tapped for betterment of the entire society. Stigma, discrimination and rights. The stigma attached to persons with disabilities, compounded by a lack of understanding of their rights, makes it difficult for them to attain their valued functionings, which Amartya Sen defined as capabilities deemed essential for human development. So when we deny them opportunities, we are basically making them difficult to attain their own development. Furthermore, women and girls with disabilities are at a higher risk of experiencing sexual and other forms of gender-based violence. The International Labour Organization, using data from latest national census, reports that 73.6% of persons living with disability in India are outside the labour force. So such a dangerous thing this is. Those with mental disabilities, women with disabilities, and those in rural areas are the most neglected. So some good points from this article. You can incorporate these points in your mains answers or essays, or you can apply them in other areas. Pre 12,000 years, government re-ups panel to study Indian culture. Now see, Indian culture and Indian history has been a matter of debate for quite some time now. The history as we know today, the scholars of history, now some are leftists, some are rightists, some are whatnot. Let's not get into that. So the history as we know today was written by the British. Now the British, or they wrote a version of history that suited their own colonial plans, like the stupid Aryan invasion theory or the Aryan Dravidian divide, and we still are divided on those lines. But over the past some years, there have been some exciting findings. Like 2 years back, there was findings by IIT that said that Indian Valley civilization is at least 7,500 years old. Then in 2019, there were some excavations at Rakhigadi in Haryana, which is the biggest Indus Valley site in India, and they found some skeletons there, and DNA analysis was done on them, and they found that they were entirely a different genus. They were not the Aryans or whatever theories have been cooked up, and those studies prove that we people living in South Asia are a completely unique genus, not what the Europeans told us that people from Africa came and then so-called Aryans came and they intermixed and they produced people. These are all stupid theories, and now we are trying to prove that. So let us see. The government has tasked an expert committee to conduct a study on the origin and evolution of Indian culture dating back to around 12,000 years ago. In fact, in Pakistan, there's a site Mehergarh, so excavation at that site have indicated that Indian civilization is at least 10,000 years old. Earlier, there was another committee that was given the same task, but it was given a 1-year period to submit their report and they couldn't, so a new committee has been formed. Earlier given the same mandate in 2016, the panel had failed to submit a report within its 1-year deadline and is now hoping to achieve the task in light of findings of Rakhigadi, Haryana excavations. The theory of Aryan invasion stands debunked in the light of the 2019 Rakhigadi DNA report under Vasant Shinde of Pune's Deccan College, which points to the continuity of Indian culture since 4,500 years. The report will mostly focus on archaeological findings of the past 15 to 20 years, since that is considered as scientific evidence. Even though there was no hard evidence yet to say Indian culture was 12,000 years old, archaeological excavations at Mehergarh, now in Pakistan, put the age of Indian civilization at 10,000 years. DNA samples of 61 skeletons found at Harappa site in Rakhigadi. The team that analyzed them showed that the present-day South Asians are descendants of an indigenous population. So there's no Aryan, no Dravidian, only an indigenous population. And if you have time, please watch a video by Dr. Subramaniam Swamy. It is available on YouTube, where he tells that this is all a myth. This Aryan versus Dravidian debate is just a myth, and he gives a proper explanation of that. Please do watch that. The South Asians who lived in the Indus Valley civilization belonged to a completely different group of hunter-gatherers who began farming much earlier, as we have been saying for years and years and years, but our history was debunked by the colonial invaders. This is in contradiction to the theory that Iranians and South Asians shared ancestry. As per the other study or the other theories of history, more commonly held theory, while the first humans out of Africa came to Indian region 65,000 years ago, the Harappan civilization was created by a mixed population of them and West Asian migrants who reached India around 9,000 years ago. The Aryans are believed to have arrived about 4,000 to 3,000 years ago from the Central Asian steppe region. So basically, these white people have messed up our history, and they still continue to do so. And in our country, we have this very bad habit of looking at ourselves through the lens of white people. White people are nobody to validate us or give us proof that we are intellectual or not. And we should stop doing that. We should do our own indigenous research. See, basically, when the colonists came, they gave this Aryan Dravidian theory because they wanted to divide India. They divided India on many facts. Aryan versus Dravidian, North versus South, caste versus caste, religion versus religion, region versus region, language versus language. So whatever they could find, they did use that to divide us. And unfortunately, even today in this age, we are fighting over such things. Aryan, Dravidian, Brahman, etc. These are all stupid things. At the end of the day, we are all Indians and we are the same. And we should have that feeling in us. So please stop fighting in the name of these stupid things. Nobody is superior, nobody is inferior. We all are equal and we are all stakeholders in the development of our country, and that should be our only aim, the development and growth of our country and the development of growth of ourselves. So folks, that is all for this video. I hope this was helpful. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss out on any new video that we post. Also, if you like the video, please press the like button. And please do connect with us on our Instagram page, UPSC for Everyone. See you next time. Till then, stay safe, stay happy and have a great day. Namaste and Jai Hind.